The Galactic Council's chamber was silent. No one had expected this. From every corner of the room, representatives from 100 different species watched the human envoy, Commander Alec Cross, standing at the center of the dais, his gaze unwavering. His words were sharp, like a blade drawn in defense. Humanity will not bow to threats. We don't negotiate with tyrants. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Commander Cross had expected this. But the others, they had not. The representatives, some tall and ethereal, others hulking and imposing, shifted uneasily in their seats. The entire room buzzed with a palpable tension, the kind that only a reckless declaration could bring. This was not what the Galactic Council had anticipated when they'd summoned Earth's emissaries for what they thought would be a straightforward negotiation. At the head of the table, the Council's presiding officer, Vina, a species of delicate beauty with pale skin that shimmered under the room's light, frowned. She leaned forward, her fingers steepled before her lips, eyes narrowing slightly as she regarded Cross. "You misunderstand," she said, her voice as smooth as the winds of her home planet, but laced with urgency. "This isn't a threat, it's an invitation to peace. You have nothing to fear. The Council seeks cooperation." Cross's eyes narrowed, the weight of her words drifting past him. He had heard her kind's pleas before, and they tasted like empty promises. His face hardened into something more resolute. "No," he said flatly, the single word cutting through the air like a blade. "The peace you offer comes at a price. A price we are unwilling to pay." Vina's eyes flicked to the screens behind him, displaying the immense size of the galactic fleet poised just beyond Earth's atmosphere. Ships that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built, the epitome of technological might. Yet it was the cold determination in Cross's eyes, in every line of his body, that held her attention. "Commander, you're making a grave mistake," Zarek's voice boomed from the back of the room. His towering form, muscles rippling beneath battle-worn armor, stepped into the light. A warlord from a species as ancient as the stars themselves, Zarek's reputation was one of relentless conquest. Humanity's defiance will not go unpunished. Cross glanced over his shoulder, meeting Zarek's gaze with an icy calm that only grew stronger. His lips curled into a slight smile, not one of humor, but of certainty. "Punishment?" He let the word hang in the air. "You mistake us. Humanity doesn't kneel to threats." The room held its breath. Zarek sneered. "Then prepare for war." A moment of stillness passed. The air thickened with the weight of the decision that had just been made. Earth had refused the invitation to bow to the Galactic Council's demands, and now, it was no longer a matter of diplomacy. It was a matter of survival. Vina, still frozen in her seat, felt her heart hammer in her chest. She had never seen anything like this in her centuries of life. How could humanity be so bold? Yet, beneath her disbelief, something else stirred. A flicker of admiration. Cross's unyielding stand against the vast power of the Council intrigued her. It wasn't fear that drove him, no, it was something far more dangerous. Hope. Hope for a future where Earth wasn't a pawn in the hands of ancient beings. Hope that perhaps, just perhaps, there was another way to exist in the galaxy, one free from domination. "The Earth will fight," Cross said, his voice calm, but it carried the certainty of a man who knew his people's worth. "We don't fight for power, for conquest. We fight for freedom." Zarek's laughter rumbled through the chamber, a sound like the crackling of thunder before a storm. "Freedom? You don't even understand what that means. But soon, you will." Vina's heart thudded against her ribs. Cross's words had a weight she hadn't anticipated. Humanity's refusal to bend was more than just an act of defiance, it was a declaration of war. But not just against Zarek's forces, no. It was a challenge to everything the Galactic Council stood for. If Earth prevailed, it would mark a seismic shift in the balance of power across the galaxy. And that, Vina realized, terrified her. She had to make a choice. Stand with the Council, and support a war that would likely crush Earth, or intervene. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table, and for the first time in centuries, Vina wondered if her species might be wrong. Maybe humanity didn't deserve to be crushed. Maybe, just maybe, they were the key to something much greater. Before she could voice her thoughts, the massive screen behind Cross flickered to life, displaying a fleet of alien warships, their weapons primed and ready. Vina's breath caught in her throat. The countdown had begun. Earth had no more time to decide. Zarek's cruel grin deepened. Let the games begin. The tension was unbearable as the chamber doors slammed shut. The fate of humanity, and the galaxy, now hung on a single decision. One that would be made in the next moments, with the survival of Earth in the balance. The council's chamber buzzed with anxious murmurs, the echo of tense voices bouncing off the metallic walls. Representatives, once united under the banner of galactic unity, now stood divided. The news from Earth had sent shockwaves across the room, unraveling a delicate fabric of diplomacy. Humanity had refused to bow. Vina sat at the head of the table, her pale fingers tracing the surface, the weight of Cross's words still reverberating in her mind. There was something unnerving about him, a quiet resolve that made her question the authority of her centuries-old race. She glanced at Zarek, who stood in the back, arms folded and a malevolent gleam in his eyes. The warlord's confidence was palpable, yet she could see the underlying uncertainty. Humanity had made a grave error, but they were not as easily crushed as he believed. Zarek, you may begin preparations, Vina said, her voice steady, but her mind was elsewhere. The future of the galaxy was teetering on a blade's edge. Humanity had drawn a line in the sand, and she couldn't shake the thought that there was more to their refusal than simple defiance. Zarek's eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. Do not question my methods, Vina, he growled, the rumble of his voice sending a shiver down her spine. They will learn. Vina wanted to respond, to offer a counterpoint, but something in Zarek's demeanor made her pause. He had a reputation for brutality, and his species' strength was undeniable. Yet, there was something about Cross's defiance that made her question everything she had been taught about humanity. Meanwhile, on Earth, Commander Alec Cross stood in his command center, staring at the live footage of the Galactic fleet preparing for a strike. The deep, pulsating hum of machinery filled the air as officers rushed back and forth, coordinating last-minute defense strategies. The atmosphere in the room was thick with tension, but Cross remained calm, his gaze unwavering. Commander, Lieutenant Torres called out, breaking his concentration. She was young, nervous, but trusted, his most loyal officer. The fleet is in position. The first wave of ships will be in Earth's orbit within hours. Are we ready? Cross turned slowly, meeting her worried gaze. The air around them felt heavier than it had ever been before. We are ready, he said, his voice unshakable. We have no choice now. We fight for our freedom, no matter the cost. Torres nodded, but her concern didn't fade. And if we fail? If we can't hold them off? Cross's jaw tightened. He hadn't allowed himself to entertain the idea of failure. We won't fail, he said firmly. Earth doesn't back down. Not now. Not ever. Back in the council chamber, the tension was palpable. As Vina studied the actions of both her fellow counselors and Zarek's people, she felt the weight of the decision growing. The pressure was building, like a storm waiting to break. Her mind raced, thinking of the consequences for Earth, for the galaxy, for everything she had ever known. Vina, you can't be serious, a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was Drell, the representative from a race of highly intelligent, technologically advanced beings. His species had been neutral in many galactic conflicts, but his gaze now locked onto hers with an intensity that could not be ignored. You're not suggesting. She raised a hand, silencing him. I am suggesting that we take a different approach, she replied, her tone firm but laced with uncertainty. Humanity is not like the others we have conquered. They fight differently. They fight for something we cannot understand. And their leader, Cross, he is not like any general we've ever faced. The room fell silent. The thought of humanity's defiance rattled everyone present. The very idea that the Earth might fight back against their might was almost laughable. Yet, Vina couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut, a nagging thought that humanity wasn't as weak as the rest of the galaxy had assumed. "You're asking for an alliance with them?" Drell asked incredulously. "Are you insane, Vina? They're nothing but a primitive species. What do they have to offer?" "I'm not suggesting an alliance," she said, her eyes narrowing. "But I believe there is something more to their resistance. Something powerful. We cannot simply crush them without knowing what drives them." Drell's lips curled into a sneer. "You're risking everything for a species that has no place in the galaxy's future. They are nothing." "Then let them prove us wrong," Vina said, her voice quiet but resolute. She stood from her seat, turning to face the massive window that looked out into the void of space. Earth was just a blue dot, yet it had defied the might of the Galactic Council. That fact had lodged itself in her mind, and now it twisted with her thoughts. The silence in the room deepened, the weight of Vina's words sinking in. The council members exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever doubted their supremacy until now. Humanity was not just defying them, it was challenging the very foundation of their power. Back on Earth, Cross paced before the main communications terminal, his mind working at full speed. The fleet above was only the beginning. He knew what was at stake, not just for Earth, but for the entire future of humanity. If they lost this fight, they would become nothing more than a footnote in history. But if they won, they would change the galaxy forever. The screen flickered to life. It was a message from Vina. "You have our attention, Commander," her voice echoed across the screen. "But be warned, there are no second chances." Cross paused, taking a deep breath. His fingers tightened around the edge of the console as he locked eyes with the image of the Council's leader. "There will be no surrender," he said, his voice a quiet declaration. "Not today. Not ever." The world seemed to hold its breath as Cross stared at the silent hologram of the galactic fleet. The image flickered before him, ships of unimaginable size hovering above Earth, the weight of their presence both a promise and a threat. His hands clenched into fists, nails digging into his palms. The cold hum of the command center surrounded him, but it felt like the very air was charged with the tension of an inevitable storm. Behind him, Lieutenant Torres watched, her eyes flickering nervously between the hologram and Cross. "We can't hold them off for long, Commander. If they attack, the defenses won't be enough." Cross didn't answer immediately. He stared at the fleet's ships, massive structures of steel and energy, their sleek surfaces reflecting the cold light of distant stars. He had faced many enemies in his life, but nothing like this. This wasn't just a battle, it was a test. A test of humanity's resolve, and a test of what they were willing to sacrifice for their freedom. "We'll make them bleed," he said finally, his voice low and steady, the weight of his words settling over the room. "Every ship that comes down, every soldier that steps foot on Earth, make them feel what it means to challenge us." Torres hesitated, but only for a moment. She understood the stakes. "And if they push too hard, Commander? If we can't win?" Cross turned slowly, his piercing gaze meeting hers. "We won't lose. Not today." The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by the soft hum of machinery and the occasional beep of consoles. Cross's gaze turned back to the fleet in the distance, his mind working through the strategies, the variables. His thoughts kept drifting back to Vina. Her message still echoed in his mind, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. There are no second chances. What did she want? What was her game? Humanity had been nothing more than a speck in the vastness of the galaxy for so long, but now they had been thrust into the spotlight. Cross didn't trust the Galactic Council. He couldn't. They saw humanity as a fragile, primitive species, not worthy of standing beside the more advanced civilizations of the galaxy. But Vina, there was something about her that didn't sit right. She didn't want to destroy them, but she had a purpose, a goal that still eluded him. He took a deep breath, as if trying to clear the weight from his chest. "Get me a secure line to Earth's global leaders. We need every government on high alert. Everyone who can fight, needs to be ready." "Understood, Commander," Torres said, moving to activate the communication system. Cross moved to the window, staring out at the dark expanse of space. Earth looked so peaceful from here, a quiet, blue jewel amidst the void. But that peace was about to be shattered. He could feel it, like a storm on the horizon. Back in the Galactic Council's chamber, Vina's thoughts were clouded with doubt. The words she had spoken earlier rang in her ears, but there was a persistent unease that refused to fade. She had told herself that she needed to see humanity as a threat, something to be eliminated. But after speaking to Cross, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to them. More to him. Her hand rested on the smooth surface of the table, her fingers unconsciously tracing patterns as she thought. Zarek, standing in the corner of the room, watched her with cold eyes, his posture rigid. He was waiting for her decision, ready to act with ruthless efficiency, but Vina had never been one to rush into decisions. Not anymore. They're different, she muttered to herself. Zarek's voice was as cold as ever. They're weak, Vina. You saw the same footage I did. They're nothing. Their defenses won't stand against us. I'm not sure, she said, her voice quieter now. Something about Cross, it's not just pride. He's driven by something deeper. I felt it. Zarek's eyes narrowed. You're wasting time, Vina. If we hesitate, if we let them gather their forces, we risk losing everything. You know the consequences. She looked at him, her face hardening. I know the consequences, Zarek. But I also know that if we destroy them without understanding them, we could be making a grave mistake. Zarek's lips curled into a sneer. A mistake? Do you mean to suggest we understand them? They are insignificant in the grand scheme of things. The frustration that had been building inside Vina finally spilled over. She slammed her hand on the table, the sharp noise cutting through the tension. They are not insignificant. If we do this wrong, it will haunt us. I want a different approach. We will study them. Before we act. Zarek glared at her, but he said nothing. The silence between them was thick, charged with the unspoken threat of their alliance coming apart. Back on Earth, the tension in Cross's command center was reaching a fever pitch. The clock was ticking. Every second that passed brought them closer to the confrontation that would either break humanity's spirit or prove their worth. Commander, Torres said, her voice steady but filled with urgency, they've entered Earth's orbit. The first wave is on its way. Cross turned to her, his expression unwavering. He had made his decision. Prepare for battle, he said, his voice a razor's edge. We're going to show them exactly what humanity is capable of. The sudden shake of the ground beneath Cross's boots jolted him from his thoughts. The first wave had arrived. From the command center, he could feel the vibrations through the reinforced floors, the distant hum of energy shields coming to life. Outside, beyond the fortified walls of the base, the sky was thick with the shadows of colossal ships descending, casting a long darkness over the land. The battle had begun, and Earth was no longer merely a pawn in the galactic game. It was a battleground. Commander, Torres said, her voice sharp, they're deploying ground forces. The first wave is setting down 2 clicks away. Cross didn't flinch. He stood still, eyes focused on the vast display in front of him, showing the silent approach of the invaders. He didn't need to see it to know the enemy's tactics. He could feel it in the way his soldiers were preparing, the way the air hummed with energy, the stillness before the storm. This was what they had been training for. This was humanity's moment to prove they weren't just survivors, they were fighters. Activate the perimeter defense systems. I want full readiness on all fronts, Cross ordered, his voice calm but firm. Torres nodded, her fingers dancing over the controls. Perimeter defense online. They're about to breach. A sharp alarm sounded, the familiar red lights flashing overhead. Cross's pulse didn't race. It never did. His mind was always cool under pressure, a trait that had served him well through countless operations. He had led men and women through battles that seemed unwinnable. Today, it wouldn't be any different. But this time, the stakes were higher. Much higher. The holographic display flickered as more ships arrived, their sleek, metallic forms silently blotting out the sky. Their immense size was awe-inspiring, almost paralyzing. And yet, it was precisely that size that made them vulnerable. Humanity might not have the numbers or the advanced technology of the galactic forces, but they had something better: ingenuity, resourcefulness, and a will to fight that none of the invaders could understand. Cross turned to the soldiers behind him, his eyes locking with each of them. "It's time to show them what we're made of. Keep your heads clear, your aim true. This is our home. We fight for it, or we die defending it." The soldiers nodded, their expressions resolute, their bodies tense with anticipation. In the control room, the sound of rapid typing and the clattering of equipment filled the air. This was it. There would be no more room for hesitation. No more questions about the morality of the war. This was survival. Meanwhile, far above in the galactic fleet, Vina stood at the edge of the council chamber, her eyes fixed on the Earth below. The planet, once a mere speck in her calculations, now seemed impossibly close, teeming with life, with resistance. Her resolve was tested as she watched the first ground forces make their descent, the boots of her soldiers beginning to crush the Earth's soil. She had always believed that they, the advanced civilizations of the galaxy, had the right to dominate. After all, they had seen it all: civilizations rising, falling, planets being consumed by time and space. What was Earth compared to that vast expanse? Nothing more than a fleeting flicker in the cosmic timeline. And yet, something nagged at her, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. She had met Cross once, his eyes had looked at her not with fear, but with defiance. It was not an uncommon sight in war, but there was something in his gaze that had lingered, something different. He wasn't just protecting his planet, he was protecting a future, a dream of something more. "Vina, we have reached the first base. Should we deploy the full force?" Zarek's voice cut through her thoughts. She turned sharply, her face a mask of cold calculation. "No. Not yet. I want to see their reaction. I want to know how far they will push before they break." Zarek raised an eyebrow, his usual confidence faltering for a moment. "You believe they'll stand against us?" Vina didn't respond immediately. Instead, she focused on the readout of the situation unfolding below. The first wave of ground troops had already encountered the perimeter defenses, but instead of crumbling, the humans were retaliating with precision. The ground shook with the sounds of explosions, the air crackling with energy fire. Earth was fighting back, fiercely and with an intensity that was almost admirable. "They'll fight until the end," Vina murmured, almost to herself. She could feel the shift in the balance, the gnawing realization that this wasn't going to be as easy as she had thought. These humans, these flesh and blood creatures, weren't like the other species she had encountered. They weren't just pawns. They were warriors. Back on Earth, Cross stood firm as the reports poured in. His tactical team was coordinating the defense with military precision. He could feel the ground trembling beneath him, the distant booms of explosions echoing through the air. The first wave had made contact, and while they were still holding, he knew this was just the beginning. "Commander," Torres said urgently, breaking his thoughts, "they're deploying something new. It's huge. We can't identify it yet." "Damn it," Cross muttered, his mind racing. "Prepare the heavy artillery. We need to slow them down." But even as he gave the order, something shifted in the back of his mind, a whisper of doubt. The enemy was relentless, their strategies shifting with every wave. He could feel the pressure mounting, the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. But he had no time for doubt. No time to second-guess. He had promised them victory. And he would deliver, no matter the cost. As the first wave of galactic forces continued to push deeper into Earth's defenses, the tension in the air thickened, heavy with anticipation. The real test had only just begun.